For centuries, the Roman Empire was the center of the world, a colossal power of law, legion, and innovation, but its end wasn't a sudden cataclysm. 476 AD is the date we remember, the year the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. But this wasn't an event. It was the final tremor of a long, slow earthquake that had been shaking the empire for generations. The fall of Rome wasn't the work of a single day, a single battle, or a single cause. It was a complex, tragic unraveling. So, how did the mighty Roman Empire, an entity that had endured for 1,000 years, finally collapse? Join us as we journey back in time to dissect the multiple crises that brought the giant to its knees. First, we must look within the heart of the empire itself. By the 3rd century AD, Rome was rotting from the inside out. The political landscape was a theater of chaos. The period known as the crisis of the 3rd century saw emperor after emperor rise and fall, often assassinated by their own guards or rival claimants. In just 50 years, over 20 men claimed the title of emperor, creating constant civil war and instability. This endless power struggle paralyzed the government. With leaders focused on their own survival, long-term planning became impossible. Corruption was rampant. Provincial governors and tax collectors enriched themselves, squeezing the populace dry and funneling wealth away from the state. The empire's treasury, once overflowing with spoils of conquest, was now hemorrhaging money. This political decay was mirrored by a devastating economic crisis. Rome had stopped expanding, which meant the flow of new wealth from conquered lands and enslaved people had dried up. To pay for its massive army and bloated bureaucracy, emperors resorted to debasing the currency, mixing precious metals like silver with cheaper ones. A coin that was once nearly pure silver became little more than a silver-plated piece of bronze. This led to runaway inflation. People lost faith in money. A farmer who sold his grain for a pouch of coins might find those same coins worthless a month later. Trade faltered. The complex network that had once connected Britain to Egypt began to break down. The rich retreated to their large, self-sufficient villas, effectively creating private kingdoms and abandoning the cities. The tax base shrank, and the state grew weaker, unable to fund the very army it needed to defend itself. It was a vicious cycle of political instability fueling economic collapse, and vice versa. While Rome was weakening from within, immense pressure was building on its borders. From the vast steppes of Central Asia, a formidable and terrifying force emerged, the Huns. Led by figures like the infamous Attila, their brutal military campaigns sent shockwaves across Europe. They weren't trying to conquer Rome, but their westward push created a domino effect. Entire peoples like the Goths, Vandals, and Franks were displaced, forced to flee their ancestral homes and seek refuge within the Roman Empire's frontiers. These weren't just small bands of raiders, they were entire nations on the move. Initially, Rome tried to manage this influx, sometimes hiring them as mercenaries, or foederati, settling them on Roman land in exchange for military service. But the sheer scale of the migration became overwhelming. In 378 AD, a pivotal moment arrived at the Battle of Adrianople. Mistreated and starving, a large group of Goths who had been allowed to cross the Danube rose in rebellion. They faced a Roman army led by the Emperor Valens himself. The result was a catastrophic defeat for Rome. The emperor was killed, and a significant portion of the Eastern Roman army was annihilated. Adrianople was more than a military loss. It was a psychological blow. It proved that the barbarians were not just a nuisance but a force capable of defeating the best legions Rome could muster on Roman soil. This event signaled a new era. The borders were no longer secure. The migrations became invasions, as groups like the Vandals carved out their own kingdoms in Roman territory, sacking the city of Rome itself in 455. The empire was being torn apart, piece by piece, by external pressures it could no longer contain. The final piece of the puzzle lies in the Roman military and the empire's fatal division. The army that had conquered the known world was a shadow of its former self. Constant civil wars had depleted its ranks and diverted its attention inward. The economic crisis made it difficult to pay, equip, and recruit loyal Roman citizens. As a result, the empire became increasingly dependent on non-Roman soldiers, the very barbarians they were often fighting. Generals of Germanic origin, like Stilicho and Ricimer, rose to become the true powers behind the throne. They commanded armies loyal to them personally, not to a distant emperor in Rome or Ravenna. This created a paradox. Rome was paying foreign mercenaries to defend it from other foreign invaders, and these powerful generals often pursued their own agendas, further destabilizing the state. Compounding this military crisis was the division of the empire. In 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian split the empire into an eastern and a western half, each with its own emperor, simply because it had become too vast to govern by one man. While intended to make administration more efficient, this eventually led to a permanent schism. The eastern half, centered on the wealthy and defensible city of Constantinople, thrived. It had a more stable economy, a larger population, and more defensible borders. The western half, with its capital moved from Rome to Milan and then Ravenna, was poorer, more exposed to invasions, and politically weaker. When the great barbarian migrations began, the east was often able to deflect them westward. The west bore the brunt of the attacks. The two halves increasingly acted as separate, sometimes rival entities rather than a unified whole. While the east would survive and evolve into the Byzantine Empire for another 1,000 years, the west was left isolated and vulnerable. So, on September 4, 476 AD, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the young emperor Romulus Augustulus, it was less a dramatic conquest and more a final, quiet act in a play that had been running for 2 centuries. Odoacer didn't even bother to name a successor. He simply sent the imperial insignia to the emperor in Constantinople, signaling that a separate Western Roman emperor was no longer necessary. The city of Rome had already been sacked multiple times. Vast territories in Gaul, Spain, and Africa were already under the control of Germanic kingdoms. The empire was an empty shell. Its collapse was not a singular event but a long, slow process of decay. It was the result of a perfect storm. Internal political rot and economic failure, combined with overwhelming external pressure and a military that could no longer defend its borders. The fall of Rome serves as a timeless and sobering lesson that even the greatest of powers can be brought down not by one fatal blow, but by 1,000 cuts from both within and without. Thank you for joining us on this historical journey. If you found this analysis insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the past. We'll see you next time.